Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole. As vaccination allows many countries to ease their COVID restrictions, this week we're looking at what life will really be like after lockdown. We'll be asking whether the world is psychologically ready for a post-pandemic reboot. Plus, what now for our shopping habits after months of online-only purchases? And how long will it be until we feel truly comfortable eating and drinking in crowded public spaces? When governments began announcing an end to lockdown measures, it was the welcome light at the end of a long, dark tunnel the world had been passing through. But not everyone is celebrating the prospect of freedom. On one hand, the pandemic has changed how we exercise, how we shop, work, and socialise. On the other, it's also changed how we feel about crowds, cleanliness, and the outside world. In fact, according to a survey in the United Kingdom, more than a quarter of adults feel overwhelmed and anxious at the thought of life after lockdown. 38% say they've now adapted to living in the slow lane, with almost a quarter dreading the full lifting of restrictions. So how could this behaviour impact on the rest of society? Well, the European retail sector is hoping for a surge in sales as people refresh their wardrobes, especially now they finally have occasions, like weddings or parties and holidays, to go to. But there may still be tough times to come for the retail and hospitality sectors. When researchers in the US asked Americans about their post-vaccine shopping plans, 40% of respondents said they would shop the same amount or even less after having the jab, suggesting some hesitation among customers who will cower cower at the sight of queues and shy away from shops. In education, according to the European Youth Forum, 3/4 of students in Europe have had their school or university completely closed during the pandemic. The Forum says with many exams scrapped, the system feels disjointed, uncertain, and risks a lost generation. Teachers have the challenge of not only ensuring students catch up on the curriculum, but also helping them overcome their separation anxiety. A report by the British Medical Journal showed around a quarter of parents reported their children's mental health had worsened since the pandemic. And many have changed jobs, even their profession, in order to work from home after the thought of being enclosed on public transport with strangers proved too much to bear. Scientists warn a kind of COVID anxiety syndrome may have led to people develop compulsive hygiene habits, including obsessive cleaning, which could prolong stay-at-home habits and delay some from reintegrating back into society. The world has been talking about a new normal for some time. The question now is really just how normal life can ever feel after such a devastating global disaster. With me now to consider the psychological impact of life after lockdown are the therapist Anjali Singh-Mitter and Dr. Nadia Svirydzenka, Senior Lecturer in Psychology at Montford University in Leicester. Nadia, as the lockdown lifts, many people will be excited about the world opening up again and getting back to, quote, the new normal. Others may be feeling a bit more apprehensive. Why should that be?
Well, first, the good. I think the opening up and having increased social contact is so important. It's something that we've been missing. Hugs are great. Social interactions are great. It helps us sustain our social connections. It's great for our health. It's great for reducing our anxieties. We feel happier because hugs increase our oxytocin, our happy hormone, lowers our blood pressure, lowers our stress hormones. But because we're sort of coming out of lockdown and adjusting to this new normal, it also is very normal to feel quite anxious about this. Social contact has become something that we perceive as a threat in the context of COVID. It's something that can be threatening, that can infect us. So kind of opening ourselves up to that threat can be anxiety-inducing.
Anjali, do you agree? Are you seeing this with the clients that you're hearing from?
absolutely. I think also there's what I'm seeing is a huge generational gap in the way that people are approaching life after lockdown. So I'm seeing younger people sort of just craving to get back to the way things were. So they're jumping headfirst straight in. Oh, you can go back to the playground, you can go back to your friends' houses, you can go back to school. I mean, kids are really loving being back in school, which is brilliant. But then you get, I've seen as the sort of older clients, and by older, I mean sort of not children, there's the capacity to think much more about the ramifications of, okay, I've lost a year of work, or, I've spent a year in my house and I'm feeling a bit more anxious in terms of health anxiety and things like that. So in terms of returning to life after lockdown, I think what I'm finding, at least in my clientele, is that the adults are actually finding it a lot harder than the kids.
To be honest, I was reading a letter from a GP, a very experienced GP, Anjali, who was saying quite the opposite. He was saying the younger generation, he witnessed refusals to injections, tears, panic attacks and faintings. And he was wondering whether there was an increasing fragility of the younger human psyche.
I think, and perhaps Nadia might be able to comment on this as well, certainly within my clientele, I'm seeing more health anxiety with adults than children, but that's specifically my little bubble. Though that being said, I've noticed that COVID has exacerbated the fears of children that were already there.
Yeah, that was really all about vaccinations, to be honest.
Yes, and so when a child is being, for me, so anyone under sort of 18 is worried about the vaccination, this, that, and the other, I want to look at why are they afraid of it? Is it actually about the needle and the vaccination, or is it about something a little bit deeper than that? And generally speaking, it's about something deeper than that, at least in my practice. So what I'm seeing is the health anxiety of, oh, I might be ill, oh, I might pass on illness, et cetera, seems to be more adult. But the children, COVID has just acted as a pressure cooker and has brought to the surface fears that already existed and perhaps would have come out over the next 3 or 4 years.
Okay. Well, Nadia, you were nodding there.
Yes, I think it's quite tricky to paint the whole generation in the same stroke. I think it's good to understand and appreciate the differences and different experiences. But I think it's to think about how vaccinations and how COVID threat has been communicated to different generations. There's been a push to kind of protect the older generations while saying kind of minimizing the risk to younger people to some extent. So it's thinking about how we communicate this information to younger people and to children as well about COVID, about the necessity of this.
What can people do, starting with you, Nadia, to cope with the anxieties post-lockdown?
Well, first of all, accept our differences and be a bit kinder to ourselves and others, and not put ourselves and others on so much pressure, to be okay with everything changing, to jump into kind of life after lockdown, to accept everything as, back to new normal. If we need a bit of time, we need a bit of space, that's absolutely fine. I think COVID situation has taken control out of our hands. It's been sort of happening around us, to us. So as we proceed, as we kind of still go through it, knowing what we can do, what is within our capacity, within our remit, in our context, is so important, because it gives you that sense of control. I can do this, I cannot do that. And having those clear boundaries can support and lower that anxiety, because you know what you're dealing with. But also not comparing to other people, not inducing that anxiety if somebody's doing better than me, And if you do feel frustrated that somebody's going faster than you, somebody's jumped in and they're living their best life and you, for some reason, can't, sort of broadening perspective, kind of doing this temporal distancing and think, in a year, will this matter? If I can't go to that barbecue in a year, will this matter?
It's a fear of missing out.
Help.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, that big FOMO thing. In a year, will this have a significant kind of input on my life? And that can help reduce anxiety.
And Anjali, how do you think people are going to cope then mentally with FOMO and everything else?
For me, the most important piece of advice that I seem to be giving out is remember that you're an individual and that you're independent. We can't lump everybody in the same boat. We can't, I know I've just talked about the different generations and things, but everybody has experienced a very different year. It's been very hard for everybody, but that's about the only generalization that we can make. So really acknowledging what is exacerbating my anxiety, what makes me happy, and how can I go easy on myself? And what can I do for the people immediately around me? So my family, the people that I'm seeing, to lighten the load a little bit in a non-self-sacrificial way, but just to acknowledge that the be kind message. It's really don't be afraid to slow down a little bit, to go at the right pace, to put one foot in front of the other, take each day as it comes. And some days are absolutely fine and you can feel like you can breeze through it. And some days you're going to want to decline an invite, or you're not going to want to go to an event because it's going to be a few too many people there. So it really is down to the individual and acknowledging what makes me okay. So what do I need?
And do you think there's going to be full acceptance of the fact that perhaps COVID is with us for the long term, a bit like flu?
Yes, I think that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, particularly those who are looking to go to university soon. You know, teenagers who, I've said to so many teenagers, you know, you're supposed to be out there exploring the world and going through various rites of passage of learning about independence and sort of understanding social boundaries, which just hasn't happened in a year. You know, they just hasn't happened in a year. So I think it's tricky for them to really acknowledge that, hang on a minute, I've got to learn to live a new normal. I'm not just rushing back to the way things once were. And I'm not just waiting for the day that things will suddenly revert to the way they once were. I really am trying to adjust and get people to sort of adjust to a mindset where you do have to continue to adapt. And the skill set that I want to be able to offer people is, how can I continuously adapt? Not just how can I wait it out? How can I weather the storm?
This kind of information, this kind of information should be out there, really. This is what the government should be perhaps putting out to people of all ages. But Nadia, a lot of people are starting to head back to the office after months of working at home, and that will bring its own mental challenges, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It looks different now, doesn't it? I've been back in the office the other day and we have these plastic dividers between the desks, and you know, the workspace looks different. For young people, the university experience looks different. I'm an educator. I've been teaching online for a year. So university experience is very, very different. Yes, it's difficult in COVID, and yes, it doesn't look the same as maybe we have imagined, but that's about managing our expectations. But within the capacity to adjust to it, to have change, I think young people, for example, are in a fantastic position to do that.
And Anjali, are there lifestyle changes you think people could make to help with their worries? I'm thinking perhaps, in my case, alcohol, in other cases, meditation and more lifestyle choices to help them relax, to banish the anxieties.
I do think it's incredibly beneficial to keep a diary and plan and put one foot in front of the other, so that there's suddenly not this overwhelm of, oh, I've suddenly got so many things to do in a very short period of time. So I think, again, this is going to be a very individual answer. To generalize it is quite tricky, because there are people who are more inclined towards mindfulness, and there are some people who, when they go to that space, they actually get very anxious. And so that needs to be sort of helped and supported and dealt with. So in the general lifestyle changes, I think there are some that COVID brought out that really benefited people. So the capacity to slow down. If we think sort of 6-8 months ago, people were getting frustrated, but we had learned to live at a slower pace. We had learned to live at a pace where we weren't rushing from one thing to the next.
Anjali and Nadia, thank you both very much for joining us here on The Agenda.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Still to come here on The Agenda, can the world's shops ever really recover from the pandemic shutdown? We'll be speaking to retail expert Mark Pilkington. Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to The Agenda. Retailers have been among those hardest hit by lockdowns, with shops around the world forced to close their doors, some for considerable months. So what does life after lockdown hold for our shopping habits? With me now is the retail expert and former chief executive of Gossard, Mark Pilkington. Mark, how has COVID changed our shopping habits?
The main thing that COVID has done through the lockdowns is it's increased the share of online very considerably. So prior to the pandemic, the UK was sitting around 19% online. But post-pandemic, it's gone as high as over 30%. It's currently around 29%. So that's about 10 years worth of development in just a few short months.
Is it change for the better? And how long will these changes be around for? I mean, in other words, are these short-term or long-term effects?
Well, I think whether you think it's changed for the better depends on who you are. There's been a lot of incumbent retailers who've obviously been very badly affected. And indeed, a number of significant ones like Debenhams and Arcadia have completely gone out of business. I think obviously if you're an online company, then you've benefited. A lot of the online players have seen very, very rapid growth in their business. From a consumer perspective, I think, thank God, we did have online, particularly with regard to grocery. For many people, it was a lifeline. Insofar as online does provide us with perhaps more choice, more convenience, and sometimes lower cost, then it could be said to be a good thing.
Could you argue, Mark, that some of these changes were in fact inevitable and would have been coming in or would have been introduced even without the pandemic?
Yes, indeed. In fact, retail has been going through a pretty serious challenge since about 2015-16, and we have seen quite a considerable number of bankruptcies and store closures even before the pandemic. What's happened is that online has emerged as a highly efficient transactional channel from the point of view of choice, cost, customer database marketing, personalized marketing, and also convenience. And I think that the online players understood that and obviously built their businesses very fast. The incumbent brands and retailers continued to rely too much on the store network, which was declining, and therefore we already saw considerable damage to the retail business. And really, COVID has just kind of put the final touches to that.
What will you think be the physical long-term effects, and visibility as well, to our high streets?
I think that there's been a lot of damage, but now rents are coming down and leases are being made more flexible. The retail property market, the people who own the malls, etc., and high streets have had to change their policies, and that is now becoming more attractive for people to start shops. I think that in the long term, it may well be that we will get a resurgence of the high street as it plays a part within an omnichannel world, providing personal contact for brands directly with their consumers. What we've seen essentially, if you sort of take a step back, is that it used to be that there were very high barriers to entry for starting chains of shops or brands. The internet came along with things like Shopify websites, and it became extremely easy to launch a brand online. And we've seen a huge level of innovation and a real flourishing of online brands with not only lots of new brands, but also lots of new products and new ideas. So that part has really flourished, but it hasn't broken out into the high street because the high street has still been a very expensive place to trade. I actually think that if we move forward with technology, rates changes, rents changes, and leases changes, that a lot of those online innovative brands will break out onto the high street over the next 10 years. And I think we're going to see a lot more innovation, smaller brands, pop-up shops, and it'll become a bit more exciting than it was. Because let's face it, although we mourn for the high street, it was actually a fairly boring place in the last 20 years or so. I think the future of brands, I call them brands now rather than retailers, but brands and retailers, is omnichannel, which is to have a strong online transactional channel, which will carry a lot of the stock and do a lot of the transacting direct to the home or for click and collect in stores. Stores, I think, will shrink and become more compact, and more store space will be used for customer service, high level, more expert customer service, and brand theatre, community building, education, and less just for the pure activity of stockholding, which is what shops used to be largely.
I mean, we've talked about our retail experience, but what about the experience in Europe and around the world? Is what you're saying applicable to those countries too?
Well, it's applicable all around the world. The major differentiator is how far online penetration has gone. So the UK is one of the highest penetrated markets in the world. China is very high. The US is quite high. Northern Europe is higher than Southern Europe. And then as we move outwards from there, places like sort of the Middle East, Africa, parts of South America, the level of online penetration is lower. But we see the same trends applying everywhere. It's just they're coming off different bases.
Mark Pilkington, many thanks for joining us here on The Agenda.
Thank you very much.
Of course, another sector devastated by the pandemic lockdowns around the world has been hospitality. Hotels, restaurants and bars have all had to rethink their futures. So what will life be like for them post-COVID? With me now is independent hospitality consultant Nadia Pendleton. Nadia, what would you say have been the very obvious changes for the hospitality sector following the lockdowns?
I mean, there's two. There's the physical change on the outside, you know, the social distancing that's needed in restaurants and bars, table service, pop-ups, and, you know, the outdoor, the sort of growth of the outdoor trade in you know, hundreds of different forms, from kind of glass igloos all the way to kind of, you know, massive tents. It's been really exciting. And the other side is kind of the innovation that's come from it. Things like what are called dark kitchens and ghost kitchens, where people cook in different sites, which is probably not what the customers see. But the other side is that there's a huge amount of development that's happened, you know, with delivery, you know, restaurants traditionally offering it, you know, to you will now deliver it at home. So there's been huge amounts of change, both internally and sort of, you know, what the consumer would see. And also, you know, in human terms, in human resources, our experience post-lockdown has changed massively, and our expectations of what we think we're going to have and what happens when we, you know, go to the pub is quite different from what it used to be.
How many of those innovations do you think will last?
I think a lot of businesses have done really well out of adopting more delivery, creating incredible food ingredient boxes that chefs can then sort of sell on. I mean, just locally to me, for example, Stein's is quite a big partner down here, and Stein's has a new at-home service where you can get your lobsters, you know, fresh from Padstow, sent up to middle of London on the courier, and you can cook that at home. And I think those sorts of innovations actually just really enhance the whole experience, and there's no reason to get rid of them now. You know, that there's nothing that needs to change to kind of go backwards in time for those. You know, whether we will still see table service versus standing at the bar, you know, that remains to be seen. That's all about real social distancing measures, and obviously we're all sort of waiting to find out what's going to happen in terms of those measures. So that will be different.
And during lockdown, when everything was closed, a lot of people went back, a lot of waiters, waitresses, service personnel went back to their home countries. There is apparently a lack of staff for restaurants and pubs and bars to open up. Is that likely to continue?
Yeah, I mean, lack of staff is an understatement. There is an absolute crisis actually in the industry at the moment. Yes, we have lost a massive volume of seasonal workers, of you know, traditional people coming across from Europe and abroad, Australia, that will come and work in this industry. And as you say as well, people who went on furlough, people who lost their jobs started looking elsewhere. And the thing that the hospitality industry, staffing-wise, has always suffered from is there is a culture of very long hours, you know, not great pay. There is sort of, you know, lots of things that are going on, you know, a slight tradition of kind of misogyny and power and etc. that makes it less appealing than those industries that people may have moved into. You know, they might have moved into lovely, comfortable work from home office jobs or call center or driving or whatever, and they may have upskilled and gone into completely different industries, which we've seen a lot of. And to pull them back to an industry that is very challenging, very demanding, can be hard, you know. And what the industry is trying to address with a huge drive across the board for recruitment is they've actually had to really freshen up and review and look at flexible working and look at you know, decent packages and not rely on kind of the old way of doing things. And that can only really be a good thing for everyone involved. I think it was long overdue in terms of professionalising the industry. Certainly in this country, you know, it would be great if we got to the levels of professionalism that you see in Australia and France and Italy.
Well, what about hotels? Or have our expectations changed? Has our experience changed in hotels?
There's been a lot more automation, you know, self-check-in, not having that kind of meet and greet. So they've had to think around how you personalise and where you put those touch points in, because, you know, the idea of most hotels, other than kind of a Premier Inn model, is where you would have a more personal experience. So they're working hard to kind of really develop that through the use of some technology, through the use of you know, various pre-conversations, you know, and being on the phone, WhatsApp, all those kinds of text messages, that kind of thing is actually working really well. You know, the best thing that's happened in hotels, as far as I can see, is that most places now offer proper breakfast in bed without the surcharge. So that's always really good, because, you know, no longer do we have these big breakfast dining rooms, and dining in your room has become a real thing. And so a lot of people are you know, developing their rooms and making them more into suites and those kind of things. So there's been a lot of change in that respect, which is great for the consumer.
Nadia, do you think the service industry, the hospitality industry, needed this break to reassess itself, to retrain, to rethink, to deal with a new normal, a new future, and perhaps new expectations? I
think you're right. I think the new normal, I think it's through any crisis, through any stressful situation, it comes innovation, doesn't it? Comes change. It forces you into a new place, and that can only be a good thing. You know, great that we have all these incredible new pop-ups. Great that people are becoming much more personable. It's a very painful way for the industry to have, you know, the process to have gone through, and, you know, there's a lot of insecurity. So I think the industry felt like it got a bit of a raw deal through this transition, but in terms of where it goes next, it's an exciting place to be, and hopefully people will be embracing the change and really moving forward.
Nadia Pendleton, many thanks to you for joining us on The Agenda.
Thank you, you're welcome.
It's been a long and hard road through the pandemic. Although we're far from out of the woods just now, there are certainly positives to look forward to. Being prepared for life after lockdown will help us all to thrive. The accepted wisdom is that there will have to be new thinking to adapt to the new normal. And there is no doubt that the pandemic has changed and will continue to change the world and the way we work, rest and play. So going back to the way we were before COVID-19 is now not an option. The challenge, and I think the opportunity, is how to start the process of thinking about just what the new normal really is. For some organisations, especially as we've heard in the retail and hospitality sectors, near-term survival is the only item on the agenda. Others are peering through the fog of uncertainty, thinking about how to position themselves once the crisis has passed. While no one can say how long it will last, what we find on the other side will not look like the normal of recent years. But, as Dr. Nadia and Anjali Singh-Mitter told us, this is our chance to reboot, to reinvent and create a better world. We cannot rewrite the past, but we can learn from it, evolve and adapt. We now have a unique opportunity to choose what to take from an extraordinary moment in history. Perhaps New York Times best-selling author Mandy Hale captures the new thinking best in her quote, "Trust the wait, embrace the uncertainty, enjoy the beauty of becoming. When nothing is certain, anything is possible." Don't forget you can watch everything from past Agenda episodes and find additional exclusive content on our website, cgtn.com/Europe, or on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @CGTN Europe. Coming up on a future agenda. As the track and field gets underway at the Olympics, we'll have an exclusive interview with the President of World Athletics, Sebastian Coe. But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.